January 31st, 1945, 10 in the morning. A walled garden behind a stone house in Sainte-Marie-aux-Mines in the snow-covered hills of eastern France. Private Eddie Slovik, 24, of Detroit, is led to a wooden post against the garden wall. 12 riflemen of the 28th Infantry Division stand 30 paces away. Slovik is calm. He is the first American soldier executed for desertion since the Civil War 80 years before. He will be the only one in the entire Second World War. The order to shoot him was signed by General Dwight Eisenhower. There were 12 riflemen because that was the regulation. By tradition, at least one rifle held a blank, so no man would ever know for certain whether he had fired a fatal round. The squad was drawn from Slovik's own division. They were combat soldiers, and none of them wanted the job. The volley came at 4 minutes past 10. 11 rounds struck Slovik in the chest. None killed him instantly. As the medical officer stepped forward and the squad grimly prepared to reload, Eddie Slovik died against the post. The snow kept falling, and the war went on without him. But to understand why Slovik, alone among 21,000 American deserters, was the one who died against that wall, and why it would take 42 years to bring him home, we have to look at who he was before the army found him. He was a small-time Detroit kid with a juvenile record, paroled from a reformatory, stamped 4F and unfit for service in 1942. He had a steady job. He had married a woman named Antoinette that November, and by every account he was devoted to her. He thought the war would pass him by. Then, in 1944, desperate for men, the draft board reclassified him 1A and took him. Slovik was assigned to Company G, 109th Infantry of the 28th Division and sent to France in August 1944. On the way to the front, during a shelling, he and another replacement were separated from their column. The two attached themselves to a Canadian unit and stayed 6 weeks before reporting back in October. Slovik had developed an overwhelming fear of combat, of the artillery, the noise, the front itself. When he reached Company G, he told his commander plainly that he was too scared to serve in a rifle company and would run if ordered forward. The request to move him to the rear was refused. So Slovik did something almost no other deserter did. He wrote it down. He handed his company a signed, handwritten confession stating that he had deserted and would desert again rather than fight. He did it on purpose. Like thousands of terrified men, he believed a written confession would get him a prison sentence, a stockade, jail time, anything but the front. Desertion convictions were common, and the usual punishment was imprisonment, not death. Slovik thought he was choosing prison over combat. He did not understand that the confession he wrote to escape the line would become the evidence that sent him to the firing squad. The court-martial was held on November 11th, 1944, Armistice Day. It lasted under 2 hours. 9 officers of the 28th Division sat in judgment. Slovik was charged with desertion to avoid hazardous duty, and his own confession was the evidence. He did not testify. His counsel had told him the case would likely end, as nearly all did, in a prison term. The 9 officers found him guilty. Then they did what had not been done in 80 years. They sentenced him to death. Even then, almost no one expected it carried out. 48 other soldiers sat under death sentences for desertion. None would be shot. The sentence needed the personal confirmation of the Supreme Allied Commander. Eisenhower received the file in December 1944. The timing could not have been worse for Slovik. The German Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, had erupted on December 16th. The American line was buckling, and Slovik's own 28th Division had been shattered in the first days. Desertion had become a genuine crisis. Eisenhower and his commanders believed they needed to make an example, to make the threat of execution real just once, to hold the line. On December 23rd, in the worst week of the Bulge, he confirmed the sentence. What happened after the firing squad is the part almost no one knows. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. We are just getting to it. Before he died, Eddie Slovik wrote a last letter to his wife. He did not rage. He wrote, "Antoinette, honey, please try to understand. They say I was a good soldier. They are not shooting me for deserting. They are shooting me because I was an ex-con, because I had no money, and because I had nobody to help me. I love you, Antoinette." The letter reached Detroit weeks later. By then, the army had already told her something different. Eddie Slovik was buried the day he died in a place built to hide men like him. It was called Plot E. It sat across a road from the WWII American Cemetery, cut off from the honored dead by a wall and a hedge. No flag, no path invisible from the road. Plot E held 96 American soldiers the army had executed, nearly all convicted of murder or rape. Their graves lay flat against the ground, marked not with names but with small numbered stones. Eddie Slovik, the only one of the 96 who had killed no one, harmed no one, was buried among them under a single number. His number was 65. Antoinette Slovik received a War Department telegram in early 1945. It said her husband had died in the European theatre. It did not say how. It did not say he had been executed or even court-martialed. For a time, she believed Eddie had been killed in action like any other soldier. The truth reached her in pieces, partly through his last letter, partly through the slow agony of trying to claim what she was owed. Antoinette was disabled, walking with difficulty. She had loved Eddie completely. When she applied for her widow's benefits and his $10,000 life insurance, she was refused. He had been dishonorably executed. She got nothing. For the next 34 years, Antoinette fought. She was a disabled widow in Detroit with little money and no power. But she wrote letters to the War Department, to the Army, to her congressman, and over the years to 7 different presidents, from Truman to Carter. She asked for 2 things: that her husband's name be cleared, and that she receive the benefits she had been denied. She was turned down every time. In 1954, the writer William Bradford Huey published The Execution of Private Slovik, telling Eddie's story to the country for the first time. It changed nothing official. The army did not move. The book became a television film in 1974, with Martin Sheen as Eddie Slovik. Tens of millions watched. For a moment, the country reckoned with what had been done to one frightened young man in a French courtyard. Letters of sympathy reached Antoinette, but the film, like the book, changed nothing official. Antoinette Slovik died on September 7, 1979, in Dearborn, Michigan. She was 65. She had spent 34 years trying to bring her husband home and clear his name, and failed at both. She was still in Plot E. She was buried in Detroit, with an empty space beside her where she had hoped he would lie. And here the story would have ended. A dishonored grave in France. An empty space in Detroit, a name the army would not clear except for a man who had never met Eddie Slovik. His name was Bernard Calka. He was a Polish-American, a Second World War combat veteran, a retired man in Macomb County, Michigan, who served as a county commissioner and worked with veterans. Calka had read the Huey book. He had learned that Antoinette died with her husband still buried under a number among rapists and murderers. He decided, as a private citizen with no standing of any kind, that he was going to bring Eddie Slovik home. It would take him 8 years. Calka began the way Antoinette had. With letters, he petitioned the army and the government. He worked through veterans groups and Polish-American associations. He pointed out the one fact the record could never answer. That of the 96 men in Plot E, Slovik alone had committed no violent crime, that he had been shot for being afraid, and that his widow had asked only to have him buried beside her. The army's position softened slowly. At last the government agreed the remains could come home, but it would not pay. The cost of exhuming Slovik and bringing him from France to Detroit fell to Calka. He paid it himself, about $8,000. In 1987, 42 years after he was shot against a garden wall, Eddie Slovik came home. His remains were lifted out of Grave 65 in Plot E and flown across the Atlantic to Detroit. The city he grew up in, the city Antoinette had waited in. On July 11, 1987, he was buried at Woodmere Cemetery in the empty space beside the wife, who had spent 34 years trying to bring him there and had died 8 years too soon. Bernard Calka stood at the graveside. There was a headstone now with Eddie's name on it, a name, not a number. After 42 years, Eddie and Antoinette were together at last. The army never reversed Eddie Slovik's conviction. He remains officially a soldier executed for desertion. Petitions for a posthumous pardon were submitted over the decades, including to Presidents Ford and Reagan. None was granted. Antoinette never received the $10,000 insurance in her lifetime. Eddie's conviction stands in the record to this day. What changed was not the verdict. What changed was that a frightened 24-year-old who died alone under a number was, 4 decades later, given back his name and laid beside the woman who loved him. Not by the institution that condemned him, but by ordinary people who would not accept how it had ended. The argument about Eddie Slovik has run for 80 years and has never been settled. The case for the execution, desertion in the face of the enemy, is among the gravest crimes a soldier can commit. The army was fighting for its life in December 1944, and a commander must hold a line other men are dying to hold. Eisenhower said he could not ask men to die in combat while sparing one who refused to join them. The case against, of 21,000 deserters and 49 death sentences, only one was shot. A poor, frightened draftee with a record and no friends, chosen, his defenders say, because no one would protect him. Coward or scapegoat? The question still has no settled answer. Private Eddie Slovik died on January 31, 1945, at 24 years old. For 42 years he lay under the number 65 in Plot E, the only one of the 96 men there who had harmed no one. Today he rests in Woodmere Cemetery in Detroit, beside his wife Antoinette, under a headstone that finally bears his name. She spent 34 years trying to bring him home and died without seeing it. Bernard Calka, a stranger, finished what she could not and asked for nothing. The conviction was never overturned, but the man came home, the frightened kid from Detroit who couldn't take the noise. The one soldier out of 21,000 who paid with his life. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle, anyone in your family served in the 28th Infantry Division, the 109th Infantry, the Battle of the Bulge, or anywhere in the European theatre of the Second World War, leave their name and what they did in the comments below. Tell us one thing about them. One thing they did. One thing they said, one thing you remember. The men who were there deserve more than a name in a database. They deserve to be remembered as people. Subscribe if you want the next story. There are more of them.